Hey all, hope all is well. This is another video in the Road to Grandmaster series, and this one I'm going to go over my round 3 game from the Charlotte Summer GM-IM Invitational. Now, if you followed the round 2 video, you know that I played an absolute marathon of an affair against International Master Andrew Hong, and quite frankly, going into this third round game, I was completely exhausted. The nature of playing 2 games a day in the United States is that when you actually finish a long game, you typically only have like a half an hour to an hour to actually regroup before the next one, because normally they separate the round times sufficiently where, basically you would have just enough time if your game kind of maxed out. So I just played an 138 move, nearly 6-hour game, and I think the round times were like 6.5 or 7 hours apart. So I was really scrambling to kind of just figure out what I was going to eat before the next round, because I obviously hadn't eaten, since breakfast, and it was now nearly the evening. So that's kind of the nature of, playing 2 games a day, which is the way normally American tournaments work. And that's fine. I don't mind it, but it hurts you when you have a really long game. So in this one, I actually was playing another strong player, again in a closed event. There are no easy games, and my opponent was Grandmaster Tanguy Ringoir from Belgium, who should ring a bell actually, because I've actually played him before in the Road to Grandmaster series, and he is an individual that was studying at UMBC. I believe he graduated now, but was very active on the American tournament circuit, going to college in the United States, and also a very, very nice guy. So shout out to him. But very, very tough game, and even though I had the white pieces, I was just completely weary. So you're going to see actually how this impacts my decision making in a moment. Any case, let's get into it. So I opened with knight f3. Tanguy played d5. I played g3, knight f6, bishop g2, e6, and castles. And part of the reason I actually wanted to go for this setup is because I believe the last time I played him with the white pieces, and this was the last time I had the white pieces against him was actually in 2018, so it wasn't in this series, but I did have a black game in the Road to Grandmaster series way back when. But basically the last time I played him with white, I actually played the system with c4, and so the line was actually bishop e7, c4, d takes c4, and then like knight a3, c5, knight takes c4, castles. And this is a very, very solid system for black, that where black actually has firm control over the d4 square, but white winds up getting the 2 bishops after something like b3, knight c6, bishop b2, bishop d7, knight e5, queen c7, takes. Something like this essentially happened in my game against Tanguy, and white does have the 2 bishops, but black has a really, really solid position based on the control of the d4 square, and he puts his rooks on c8 and d8, plays the move b6, and says, well, okay, you have the 2 bishops, but so what? And many times, actually, black winds up trading the dark squared bishops because he gets to play knight d5 and bishop f6. And that actually happened in the game against Tanguy that I played in 2018. And yeah, it was I had some pressure, but it was a draw. I was actually willing to repeat that line because I had new improvements in the variation. And if you actually recall, I actually had played this very system with white against Seth Homa, FIDE Master Seth Homa, in the Chicago Open, which was my last tournament in May. So the tournament right before this one. So because of that, I actually thought, I wouldn't mind testing him in this variation again, because it's a very risk-free position where white, pretty much has like a win or a draw, but it's very hard to lose that structure. So I would have been down to go for that again. But instead, after e6, castles, bishop e7, c4, Tanguy actually did not take on c4 and instead castled himself. And this came as a little bit of a surprise to me because, okay, it maybe isn't a huge surprise. Castling is a main line in the system, but I didn't have any sparkling ideas against just the mainline Catalan, and I was unsure if I wanted to test his knowledge there because I knew he was a huge exponent of the Catalan for nearly a decade. So it was just something where I thought his experience in this territory would be greater than mine. So in this very position, I actually decided to play a move I'd looked at very briefly and thought was interesting, and it was actually the timid-looking move at d3. And d3 is a very rare move in Catalan positions, and because normally d4 is played taking more space in the center, but there is some venom to this setup, and I'm going to show you it in a moment. So the idea with d3 is that after c5, which was played, now taking advantage of the fact that I didn't play d4 and trying to just, get a nice pawn duo in the middle, the idea is actually now to take on d5 and to actually play d4. So the point is that if e takes d5 was played and it was not played, my idea was actually to follow up with d4. And the question is, well, what did I achieve playing d4 in 2 moves instead of 1? Well, the difference here is because black willingly played the c5 move, I have the potential to play against an Isolani on d5, an isolated pawn. And, it's not everyone's cup of tea to play what would look like the Terrace defense. This is basically the Terrace defense, but black as a tempo up. And the argument was that even with a tempo up for black, that white would have a little bit of an advantage because the fundamentals of the position haven't changed. If I'm able to play d takes c5 at a later juncture, I'll have 2 pawn islands, and white will have 3 pawn islands because of the isolated pawn in the middle. So that's essentially the idea, and it's something that Alexander Grishchuk, very famous super grandmaster, had played successfully against another Russian grandmaster by the name of Igor Lisich. And so in their game actually went d4, knight takes was actually played in their game, and after d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight c6, and knight c3 was the move. And there was an endgame position that was actually quite unpleasant that arose after knight takes d4, queen takes d4, bishop f6, and queen c4. And the issue is here, black has a little bit of trouble developing the rest of his queen side, in particular the bishop on c8, because of the pressure on the d5 knight. And there are some options here, but Lisich decided to play bishop takes c3. And this move is quite radical because you're giving up the bishop pair to develop, and white actually decided to give the bishop pair back, but to be a pawn up. And in this position, believe it or not, white actually went on to win the game because his bishop on d4 was relatively unopposed and stronger than the one on c6, which was blocked out by the e2 and f3 pawns. So white won a very nice game where he kind of grinded him out and had just an extra pawn and a little bit more activity, and it was a little bit unpleasant for black to handle. So I kind of went in thinking, well, I wouldn't mind playing this kind of position where there's a 2 results game and it's slightly better for me. And this was kind of what I was angling for with the d4 move, because I figured that he probably wouldn't want to go for a Terrace defense. It's not the Terrace is a very anti-positional opening for black. So if you're a positional player like Tanguy is, I figured he wouldn't really want to go for this. So I guessed correctly, and knight takes d5 was actually played. And now I went d4, and after c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight c6 was played. So far so good. This is actually following the Grishchuk game, the Grishchuk-Igor Lisich game. And here I actually made an accuracy. I did not follow that game to a T, and maybe it was a little bit because of fatigue, or maybe it was because I just didn't quite understand the position well enough yet. And instead of playing knight c3, which was the move in that game that I just showed, I instead played knight takes c6. And the issue is with knight takes c6 is that after b takes c6, even though, you could see that Black actually does have 3 pawn islands here, and the A and C pawns are split. Black's knight on d5 is now very, very solid and really does a great job of shutting out my bishop on g2. And moreover, this bishop on c8 that had a trouble developing all of a sudden has the a6 square to pop out to and get pressure. And the rook on a8 can now even potentially activate on the half-open b file. So essentially, the structural deficit is actually well compensated by the activity of and the furtherance of the development of Black's pieces on the queen side. And because of that, White actually doesn't really have anything here. Now, after b takes c6 was played, Tanguy actually offered me a draw. And I thought on it for a little while, but not too long, and I actually wound up accepting this draw. And the reason I accepted this draw was twofold. One, because I did not have an inkling about how to proceed in this position, and it did feel to me that Black now had pretty decent play on the queen side, as I've intimated. And then secondly, I just played an 138 move game. I pretty much had little to no food in my stomach, and I really wanted to just rest a little bit because the tournament is long, and I didn't want to play a game where I was certainly fatigued and was not going to be at my best, and I'd already aired a little bit and not had anything serious in this position as far as an advantage is concerned. So I thought, you know what, this might be one of those draws that makes sense. And so I accepted the draw. It was a relatively quick game, as you could see, only 10 moves, but I think it was probably the right decision at the end of the day. And if you just average out, my first game was 138 moves, and this game was 10 moves. Even with a 10-move game, that's 148 moves from 2 games. That's 74 moves on average from 2 games, and that's incredibly, incredibly long, intense, under pressure, under duress, and this was the most sensible thing for me in this moment. So I hope you got a little bit of sense of what I should have gone for, though, which was this knight c3 idea, keeping the tension a little bit more, not helping the bishop activate. And really, I'm actually willing to spoil my pawn structure on the c3 square because if knight takes c3, b takes c3, it's me that has the half-open b file and the bishop that can develop multiple ways. And you can actually see that sometimes, as far as the queen side is concerned, development actually trumps pawn structure. So keep that in mind, too, when you're actually playing your own games, that a lot of times in queen's pawns openings, the development is really the key. All right, that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. Please like and/or subscribe to the channel. And if you want to support the Road to Grandmaster journey, you could do so by making a donation through the PayPal link in the description below. Thanks again. Take care.